My boss leaned back in his chair and smirked, sliding a thin envelope across the table. "Budget constraints," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Sign this severance agreement tonight, or you get nothing." 29 years of loyalty, erased in a single sentence. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, even the night my mother died, all for this company. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen, but instead of signing, I looked him in the eye and smiled. He thought he had won. What he didn't know was that I only needed one phone call to end him. I walked out of Harold Klein's office with his words still ringing in my ears. 29 years reduced to budget constraints. My feet carried me down the long, sterile hallway, but my mind was wandering back over nearly 3 decades of loyalty. I remembered the first day I walked into the building, a fresh graduate eager to prove himself. I had worked harder than anyone, stayed later than everyone. People came and went, but I remained, the steady hand that never wavered. Over the years, I became the man people leaned on when projects spiraled out of control. 15 years ago, when the company nearly collapsed under a disastrous merger, it was me who spent nights poring over numbers, restructuring processes, and convincing skeptical clients to stay. My work didn't just save profits, it saved jobs. Hundreds of families had roofs over their heads because I refused to give up. Yet through it all, recognition never reached me. Awards, bonuses, promotions. Those went to louder men, men who played golf with Harold or shared whiskey with board members. I didn't complain. I thought integrity would speak louder in the end, but integrity doesn't show up in quarterly reports. Numbers do. And now, my number was up. That evening, I arrived home long after sunset. Through the window, I saw my daughter setting the table. She had turned 16 last week, and I had promised her I would leave work early to celebrate. Instead, I had been trapped in another meeting, watching Harold raise a glass to new beginnings for the company. I slipped inside quietly. My wife glanced at me, her eyes searching, but I only managed a tired smile. I wanted to tell her what happened, but the words clung to my throat. I told her I was late because of paperwork. It was a lie, but softer than the truth. After dinner, I sat alone in my small home office. The glow of the computer screen lit my face as I pulled up emails I had long ignored. My cursor hovered over an internal message marked Confidential, Phase 1 Layoffs. My stomach tightened. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There it was, a list of names. Men and women I had worked beside for decades. Loyal, hard-working people. Their names were highlighted in red, as though they were merely numbers on a spreadsheet. I scrolled with dread, half expecting to find my own name among the condemned. But it wasn't there. I exhaled slowly, almost relieved. Then something strange happened. I looked up from the screen and across the room. Harold stood at the other end of the office floor earlier today, staring directly at me. That look, half smirk, half calculation, gnawed at me now. Why wasn't my name there? Relief faded quickly into unease. The next morning, my unease became reality. Harold summoned me into his office with that smug grin I had grown to despise. The blinds were drawn, his desk neatly stacked with folders, and at the center lay a single envelope. He gestured toward it with deliberate slowness. "Thomas," he began, his voice dripping with mock sympathy, "I'm afraid the company has to make difficult choices, budget cuts, restructuring. You understand." He pushed the envelope closer. "You're being let go, effective immediately." I felt the air drain from the room. Let go? I repeated, my voice cracking. It's not personal, Harold said smoothly. Just numbers. He leaned back, studying me like a man dissecting an insect. My hand shook as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a severance agreement, 3 pages of legal jargon. At the bottom, one clause caught my eye. By signing, I would forfeit all pension rights. 3 days before it vested. 29 years gone, vanished with a stroke of a pen. I swallowed hard. My chest ached as if someone had driven a knife straight through me. I wanted to shout, to throw the papers back in his face, but my voice betrayed me. Why now? I whispered. Timing, Harold said, smiling thinly. Timing is everything in business. Sign it tonight. If you don't, you walk away with nothing. I clenched the papers, my knuckles white. Images of my wife, my daughter, and the home we struggled to pay for flooded my mind. What kind of man would I be if I walked away empty-handed? Yet what kind of man would I become if I surrendered so easily? That afternoon, I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a message from my wife. Will you be home for dinner? My thumb hovered over the keys. Finally, I typed back, I'll be late. Don't wait up. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. The hours crawled until evening. I returned to Harold's office as instructed. He was waiting, leaning casually against his desk. When I entered, he didn't offer me a seat. Instead, he walked up close, his breath sour with coffee and arrogance. You should be grateful, he whispered in my ear. Most men don't even get an offer like this. 3 days from now, Thomas, you won't matter at all. So sign while you still can. The words sliced through me deeper than any knife. 3 days. That was all that separated me from security, from the reward of nearly 3 decades of sacrifice. Harold was stealing it from me, grinning as he twisted the blade. I slipped the envelope under my arm, nodded stiffly, and turned to leave. My chest burned, my mind a storm of rage and despair. But beneath the chaos, a spark flickered quietly. 3 days. That was enough time. He thought he had buried me. He didn't realize he had just awakened me. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Harold's words echoing in my head. 3 days from now, you won't matter at all. Rage tangled with dread until I finally got up, poured myself black coffee, and sat at my desk. The company laptop glowed in the darkness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, driven not by loyalty anymore, but by suspicion. I dug through archived folders and forgotten emails, the kind most people delete without thought. Buried in a string of forwarded memos, I found something chilling. A spreadsheet labeled Employee Cost Analysis, Phase 2. My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. At the top of the document was a bold line, avoid paying lifetime pension, savings in the millions. Below were names, men and women who had spent decades building the company. Names highlighted in red, crossed out like liabilities on a balance sheet. My breath caught when I recognized some of them. Martha, who trained me my first year. Carl, who stayed late every night to support a family of 5. These were not slackers, not dead weight. They were the backbone. And now they were sacrifices on Harold's altar of greed. My name wasn't on the list yet, but I understood. Harold hadn't spared me out of kindness. He was calculating, waiting until the very last moment to maximize the company's gain. The next evening, my daughter sat across the dinner table, smiling shyly as she asked, "Dad, will you be at my birthday this year?" Her eyes lit with hope, a fragile kind of trust I had broken too many times before. My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes, to promise her the world, but the truth was heavy and bitter. I simply nodded and forced a smile. She deserved better than silence, but silence was all I had. The following day, at the office, whispers floated through the halls. Entire teams vanished overnight. Cubicles stood empty like abandoned homes. While others speculated about budget cuts, I knew better. In the break room, a nervous colleague leaned toward me and whispered, "You're not the only one, Thomas. They're coming for all of us." His eyes darted around before he slipped away, leaving me with a chill down my spine. That night, I returned to my home office, determination replacing fear. I pulled out old files I had saved over the years, audits, financial reports, documents Harold thought no one noticed. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. But as I pieced them together, a darker picture emerged. Numbers didn't match. Revenue streams disappeared only to reappear under vague categories. Payments labeled consulting fees had no corresponding services. Hours turned into dawn, my desk covered with scattered papers. My daughter peeked into the room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked softly. I looked at her, weary but resolute. "When you do the right thing, sweetheart, always keep proof," I told her, "because one day someone will try to take it away." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded, the way children do when they sense something important. By midweek, the missing pieces snapped into place. A secret ledger, buried within financial records, revealed a hidden fund, a slush account that redirected millions to pay off external auditors and silence dissent. Harold wasn't just trimming pensions. He was buying protection to keep the board blind and the government at bay. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the discovery crushing me. If I exposed this, chaos would erupt. Stockholders would flee. Thousands of employees might lose their jobs. But if I stayed silent, men like Harold would continue to strip people of the dignity they had worked a lifetime to earn. It was a cruel dilemma. Justice at the price of ruin, or silence at the cost of my soul. My hands trembled as I copied everything onto a small USB drive. It felt almost too light for the burden it carried. Names, numbers, proof of betrayal on an industrial scale. I placed it in a metal case, turned the dial on my old safe, and locked it away. The click of steel meeting steel echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. As I stepped back, a strange calm settled over me. Harold thought he had buried me. He thought I was finished. But I had just armed myself with something far more dangerous than anger, evidence, and I wasn't going to waste it. The USB drive weighed heavily on my mind even after I locked it away. Every click of the safe's dial echoed in my chest. Evidence was one thing, but evidence alone didn't change the world. It needed a voice, someone who could make it matter. I stared at my phone, scrolling past contacts I hadn't touched in years, until I stopped at a single name, Evelyn Shaw. 20 years ago, she was just a junior investigator, ambitious but green. I remembered the night vividly. She had stumbled upon evidence of misconduct at another firm, and the weight of it nearly destroyed her career. I had been the one to step in, guiding her to the right documents, pointing her toward the truth, helping her survive the political storm that threatened to swallow her. She had promised me then, with tears in her eyes, "I'll never forget this, Thomas." Now, 2 decades later, she was no longer a junior anything. Evelyn Shaw was a senior federal inspector with the power to bring down entire corporations, and I needed her. My thumb hovered over the call button. Fear gnawed at me. What if she had forgotten? What if she had changed, corrupted like the others? But time was bleeding away. I pressed the button. The line rang once, twice, then her voice, cool and precise. Shaw. I swallowed. Evie, I said softly. There was a pause. Then recognition sparked in her tone. Thomas? It's time, I whispered. It's finally time. Another silence, then a steady reply. I'll handle it. Send me nothing. Just stay quiet. She hung up before I could say more. The room fell still, the weight of 29 years pressing down on me. Relief mingled with dread. One call. That was all it took to set something unstoppable in motion. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my wife and daughter. For the first time in days, my hands didn't shake. I ate slowly, listening to their laughter, letting it wash over me like music I hadn't heard in years. My wife looked at me curiously. You seem different, she said. I smiled faintly. Maybe I am. I didn't tell them why. Some burdens are too heavy to share, even with those you love. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, I stood by the window. Outside, the street was empty, the night air still. Then, faint headlights cut through the darkness. A black sedan rolled to a stop across the street. No one got out. No lights inside flickered. It simply sat there, silent, watching. My pulse quickened. Evelyn had said to stay quiet, but who else knew? The next morning, the world shifted. I awoke to my phone buzzing endlessly. News alerts, emails, messages pouring in. I grabbed it, eyes widening as the headline blazed across the screen. National investigation, launched into corporate pension fraud. Subtitles scrolled. Whistleblower evidence points to systematic scheme, defrauding longtime employees. Federal inspectors raid headquarters. I turned on the television. Images flashed. Men in suits carrying boxes out of the building I had given half my life to. Security guards holding back shouting reporters. Harold Klein, pale and furious, shoving microphones away as he was rushed into a car. I sat back, breathless. This wasn't just happening. It was happening fast. And the spark had been a single phone call. But as I watched, a bitter realization crept in. This wasn't spontaneous. It was too organized, too precise. Evelyn hadn't scrambled overnight. She had been preparing for months, maybe years. My call hadn't started the fire. It had simply been the match to ignite the pile of fuel she had already stacked high. The truth both comforted and unsettled me. Had I really started this? Or had I just played my part in someone else's plan? That afternoon, the dilemma clawed at me. Evidence I had locked away could unravel every detail, could destroy Harold and the board beyond repair. But it could also drag innocent employees into the mud, people who had no part in the corruption. My choice was clear, yet impossible. Release everything and scorch the earth, or hold back and risk Harold slithering free. The rain began that evening, steady and relentless. I stood by the window, the safe behind me, my heart torn in two directions. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps at the door. I froze. Through the glass, blurred by rain, I saw him. Harold Klein, drenched to the bone, his face pale, but his eyes burning with something between fury and desperation. He had come to me. The morning after Harold appeared outside my home, the storm had not passed. It had only begun. News outlets screamed headlines that rattled the entire industry. Stock plummets as federal agents raid corporate giant. The ticker scrolled mercilessly across every screen, shares down 30% in a single day. Analysts called it the beginning of a free fall. At the office, panic set in. Clients withdrew contracts, investors demanded answers, and the once proud lobby became a revolving door of reporters pressing for statements. Inside the walls, employees whispered nervously, wondering who would be next, who might lose their jobs, who was guilty, and who was not. The empire Harold had built on intimidation and greed was crumbling in real time. At home, the television blared footage of chaos, workers spilling out into the street, chanting angrily. My daughter, seated at the kitchen table, turned her big brown eyes toward me. "Dad," she asked softly, "did you do something wrong?" The question pierced me more sharply than Harold's threats ever could. My throat tightened. "No, sweetheart," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I did what was right. Sometimes. The world doesn't see it that way right away." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her gaze. By evening, the story had twisted again. New documents surfaced in the press, documents I hadn't provided. They exposed deeper layers of deception. Pension funds rerouted, shell companies laundering money. And with them came speculation. Insiders leaked damning evidence against top executives. I sat frozen, realization dawning. Someone else had stepped into the light. It wasn't just me. There was another whistleblower. The media latched onto the narrative, painting a picture of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of leadership. Anchors leaned in. Voices hushed with manufactured drama. Sources suggest a senior member of the board may have been involved in the leak. Could the betrayal have come from the inside? The words sank like lead into my stomach. This wasn't only about Harold anymore. It was bigger, deeper, more dangerous. The next week tore through the company like wildfire. Federal subpoenas arrived daily. Executives vanished into closed-door meetings and emerged pale and sweating. The once untouchable headquarters now looked like a besieged fortress, its glass windows reflecting fear rather than power. Employees began leaving in droves. Some resigned out of principle. Others fled to protect their careers before the collapse consumed them. Entire departments emptied overnight, leaving projects half-finished, clients abandoned. Partners who had shaken hands with Harold for decades severed ties without hesitation, their public statements dripping with rehearsed outrage. I sat in my living room, watching all of it unfold, with a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. Every headline vindicated me, but every panicked voice reminded me that innocent people were being caught in the blast. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn. "We need to talk." We met in a quiet corner of a diner, far from the chaos. She leaned across the booth, her eyes sharper than ever. "Thomas, listen carefully," she said. "What you gave me lit the match. But don't fool yourself. It wasn't the fire. We've been watching Harold's company for years. Corruption this deep doesn't go unnoticed forever. You were the spark, not the storm." Her words left me reeling. Relief washed over me. This wasn't all on my shoulders, but so did fear. If the government had been circling for years, then the rot was worse than I imagined. And if I was just the spark, then others had to be burning too. I stared at her. "So what happens now?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Now it gets ugly." Back at home, I wrestled with the dilemma Evelyn's words had carved into me. Should I keep pressing forward, hand over the rest of my evidence, drive the final nail into Harold's coffin, and risk dragging countless others into ruin? Or should I stop, protect my family, and let the government finish their work without me. That night, rain returned, tapping against the windows like fingers demanding to be heard. I sat alone in the living room, the safe behind me, its locked door concealing truths too heavy to ignore. A creak of the floorboard snapped me from my thoughts. I turned. There, standing in the dim light, was Harold, soaked to the skin, rainwater dripping onto my carpet, his once impeccable suit clinging to him like rags. His arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation etched deep into his face. His voice cracked, no longer the smooth venom of a tyrant, but the rasp of a man cornered. "Thomas," he whispered, "please, you have to help me." Harold stood dripping rainwater onto my living room floor, his once commanding presence reduced to a trembling shadow. My wife appeared at the doorway, her hand clutching our daughter's shoulder, both of them wide-eyed with fear. I gestured sharply for them to go upstairs. They hesitated, but one look at Harold's broken frame sent them retreating down the hall, the sound of their hurried footsteps fading into silence. "Please," Harold rasped, his voice raw. "Don't send me away. Don't call them yet." I crossed my arms, anger rising. "You already sent me away, Harold. 3 days before my pension, after 29 years. His eyes darted wildly, searching for words, then finally collapsed into truth. "I had no choice. I'm not the one pulling the strings." He sank into the couch as if his legs could no longer carry him. "The board, Thomas. They run everything. They told me who to cut, when to cut. I was just the executioner." I wanted to laugh, to spit at the pathetic defense, yet his voice carried a tremor of sincerity that unsettled me. Harold reached into his soaked jacket and pulled out a folder wrapped in plastic to keep it dry. He pushed it toward me with shaking hands. Inside were documents far more damning than anything I had uncovered. Hidden accounts, offshore subsidiaries, payments routed through shell corporations. But one file stopped me cold. A list of companies, dozens of them, each connected by the same shadowy entity, each exploiting their oldest employees in the same way. "This isn't just one company," Harold whispered, clutching his chest as if confessing a sin. "It's an entire network. They've been doing it for decades. If you think I was the villain, you don't understand. I was just another pawn." My stomach twisted. Rage battled pity inside me. Harold had destroyed my career, stripped me of security, humiliated me in front of my family. Yet the picture he painted was larger, darker than I had imagined. He wasn't the architect of betrayal. He was a tool wielded by something much greater. "Why are you showing me this?" I demanded. "Because I can't stop it alone," Harold said. And then, in a moment that shattered every image I had of him, he dropped to his knees. He clutched my hand like a drowning man clinging to driftwood, his voice cracked with desperation. "Only you can save me, Thomas. Only you can stop them." The sight of Harold Klein, the man who had lorded over me, humiliated me, stolen my future, kneeling in my living room, shook me more than any threat could have. My chest heaved with conflicting emotions. Should I help him? Or should I let him drown in the same storm he had once unleashed on me? I pulled my hand free, turned away, and left him kneeling on the carpet. The weight of his plea lingered in my ears long after I heard him weeping. The following morning, I opened the folder again at my desk. The files painted a horrifying picture. Across the country, thousands of employees had been cut loose in the same ruthless manner I had faced. Their pensions erased, their lives shattered, Entire careers tossed aside like garbage, orchestrated not by one corrupt executive, but by a silent syndicate that owned pieces of nearly every major firm. My daughter entered quietly, rubbing her eyes. She looked at the stack of papers and frowned. "What's all that, Dad?" I hesitated, then patted the chair beside me. "It's proof," I said softly. "Proof that sometimes it takes a long time for the right thing to finally show up. But when it does, we have to be ready." She leaned against me, not fully understanding, but I felt her trust, fragile and real. And it broke me more than the betrayal ever had. The choice before me loomed like a cliff edge. If I released these files, the scandal wouldn't just topple Harold's empire. It would detonate across the industry. Tens of thousands might lose jobs. Stock markets could quake. But if I stayed silent, the machine would keep grinding down honest men and women until nothing was left. The cursor blinked on my computer screen, taunting me. My hand hovered over the mouse, sweat beading on my forehead. Then, with a breath that felt like both surrender and defiance, I dragged the files into a new email addressed to Evelyn Shaw, the Inspector General, and every major journalist I trusted. I typed no message. The truth needed no decoration. For a moment, I hesitated, thinking of my wife, my daughter, the fragile safety I might be destroying. Then I clicked send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt like the strike of a hammer sealing fate. Behind me, the safe loomed silent, empty now. Ahead, the world would burn with the truth I had unleashed. Weeks passed before the storm quieted. The headlines no longer screamed my company's name, but the ashes of its collapse still smoldered. Harold's empire was gone. The board scattered into lawsuits and indictments, their fortunes stripped as swiftly as they had once stripped others. Through it all, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the day someone came for me. But instead, an envelope arrived in the mail. It bore the seal of the Department of Labor. Inside was a formal letter reinstating my pension, retroactive to the day I had been fired. Attached was a statement acknowledging my service and integrity. I read it twice, scarcely believing it. 29 years had not been erased after all. They had been restored, given back not by the men who stole them, but by the justice they could not escape. The following morning, for the first time in more than a decade, I was the one to drive my daughter to school. We sat in the car as sunlight poured across the windshield. She smiled, almost shy, when she said, "I like this, Dad." My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Days later, I received an invitation from a new firm. They wanted me to join as an advisor, to help build a company rooted in transparency and fairness. When I walked into their modest office for the first time, I recognized faces, former colleagues, men and women who had also been discarded like me. They had come together, rising from the wreckage, to build something different. "Welcome home, Thomas," one of them said. I shook their hands, but deep inside, a question gnawed at me. Could I accept this peace, this second chance, or was I meant to keep fighting? To rest was tempting. To fight again was terrifying. Both paths carried a cost. That night, as I sat in my study, my phone buzzed on the desk. A new message appeared, stark and unsettling. "We need you for another battle." I stared at the words, the screen glowing like a challenge in the dark. My pulse quickened. Rest or war? An end or another beginning? Before I could decide, the world moved on. Months later, I stood in a crowded community hall. My daughter's birthday cake sat on the table, candles flickering as she leaned forward to blow them out. For the first time in her life, I had been there from beginning to end. No late nights, no broken promises, no empty chair at the celebration. Her laughter filled the room, and I realized this was what I had fought for all along. The industry had changed. The investigation spread beyond Harold's empire, shaking boardrooms across the country. New regulations were drafted, old practices outlawed. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. It was hope. And then, one morning, I saw him. Harold Klein, thinner, older, stripped of his suits and swagger. He stood at a community center, handing out food to workers in need. Our eyes met briefly. There was no arrogance, no smirk, only weariness, and perhaps something like repentance. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. In the quiet after the storm, I found my rhythm again. My pension gave us security. The new company gave me purpose, and my family gave me strength. I had learned the cruel truth. Justice does not come quickly, but it does come. And when it does, it reshapes everything. Late one night, I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed, watching her sleep. She breathed softly, the glow of the lamp painting her face in peace. I leaned close and whispered, I kept my promise. The house was silent, but in that silence, I felt the weight of all I had endured lift from my shoulders. I had walked through betrayal, through fire, through loss, and somehow I had come out whole, not unscarred, but stronger. The fight was not over, not for the world, but for me, for my family. A new chapter had begun.